The Alpha, the Omega could see when everyone would die. It wasn't a gift. It was a curse that arrived the moment she opened her eyes as a child. Whenever she looked at someone, a faint shimmer appeared above them, sometimes a date, sometimes a number, sometimes a glimpse of how they would leave the world. It was never wrong. Because of it, she stopped looking at people. The city around her was always alive with sound and light, but in her eyes, every face carried a countdown. She learned to live quietly, to keep her gaze low, to walk like a shadow through the glowing streets of the city of glass. Her world was made of silence and ticking clocks. In her small observatory on the city's edge, she wrote down every death she saw in thin silver ink. The walls were covered with names and numbers. No one ever visited. No one ever stayed. That morning, she stepped out into the market square, the glass towers shining above her. People passed by, their endings flickering like candlelight in the wind. She didn't need to look for long, the numbers came anyway, like whispers that never stopped. Then she saw him. He stood at the highest balcony of the plaza, looking out over the sunrise. The light struck his face, and for the first time in her life, Omega saw nothing. No shimmer, no time, no end, just a man, calm and still, watching the dawn as if he belonged to it. She blinked and looked again. Still nothing. Her chest tightened. For years she had tried to imagine what it would be like not to see someone's death. Now, standing there, she realized it frightened her more than anything. He turned and caught her watching. "You've been staring for a long time," he said gently, his voice low, curious. "Are you trying to find something?" Omega hesitated. She wanted to turn away, but something about his voice held her in place. She said, barely a whisper. "I don't understand." "What don't you understand?" he asked. "You don't have an ending," she replied. "Everyone has one. But you, there's nothing." He smiled faintly, not surprised, not even confused. "Maybe that means my story hasn't started yet." He walked past her and disappeared into the crowd. She stood frozen long after he was gone, the morning light fading into the silver streets. For the first time in centuries, she felt curiosity instead of dread. Who was he? Why could she not see his death? And why, when she looked into his eyes, did her heart feel something she had forgotten, hope? Later, back in her observatory, she sat surrounded by her glass spheres. Each one held a frozen image of a death she had seen. She traced her fingers across them, feeling the hum of lost lives. The city outside pulsed softly, a heartbeat she no longer felt part of. She whispered to herself, "I see everything. I see too much. So why not him?" The clocks around her began to slow. Their ticking faded into silence, one by one, until the room was still. Time itself seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. Somewhere beyond the city, the Alpha was walking beneath a sky filled with shifting stars. And for reasons she could not yet understand, the universe had changed course. It was not a title she chose. The name came from the frightened whispers of those who had learned what she could do. Some called her a prophet, others a curse wrapped in human form. The truth was simpler and far more painful. She had been born with eyes that could see death. Whenever she looked at someone, she saw a number in the air beside them, faintly glowing, changing as the seconds slipped away. Sometimes she saw flashes too. A street where they would fall, a sound they would hear in their final breath, a color of the sky above them when their story stopped. It came without her will. It came without mercy. As a child, she tried to tell people what she saw. She warned her mother not to board a train one day, told her friend not to go near the lake. No one listened. When they died exactly as she had seen, fear replaced love. By the time she turned 17, the city had learned to avoid her. People crossed the street when she walked by. Some prayed, others cursed, but all looked away. And so she learned to look away too. The city of glass shone beneath her feet, silver streets lit by endless lamps that mimicked starlight. Its towers pierced the clouds, reflecting the pale blue moons that circled above. Every surface shimmered, every window showed a different kind of life. It was a city of progress, of invention, of immortality sold in fragments to the rich. But for Omega, it was a graveyard made of light. Each time she passed a stranger, their death flashed before her eyes like a reflection on the surface of water, beautiful for a moment, then gone. She walked with her hood low, eyes half closed, counting steps instead of souls. Her home was on the outer edge of the city, where the towers thinned and the sky could still be seen. It wasn't a house so much as an observatory, a forgotten dome of glass and steel. Inside, hundreds of clocks lined the walls, all ticking at slightly different speeds. They were her only companions, and she loved them for their honesty. Time never lied. In the center of the observatory stood her table, covered with small glass spheres. Each one contained a fragment of what she had seen, a vision of a person's final moment, captured in light. A man falling beneath a collapsing bridge. A woman smiling before the fire consumed her. A child looking at the stars just before the darkness took him. She catalogued them all, writing tiny notes in silver ink. Perhaps it was madness. Perhaps it was her way of pretending to understand the endless river of endings that flowed through her eyes. That morning, the clocks woke her with their uneven rhythm. The air was cold and smelled faintly of rain. She stepped outside, wrapped in a dark shawl that shimmered like smoke, and made her way toward the central district. She rarely went there anymore, but she needed food, and she liked to walk when the city was quiet. As she moved through the streets, she noticed how the air trembled around her. People felt her before they saw her. They didn't know why, only that something in them tensed when she passed. She could almost taste their fear, sharp and metallic. Near the Sky Plaza, she paused to look at the horizon. Dawn was rising, soft gold spreading through the glass towers. For a moment, the city looked almost beautiful. Almost alive. That was when she saw him. He stood on the high balcony that overlooked the plaza, facing the sun. His posture was calm, steady, unafraid. The light caught the edges of his hair, turning it into fire. He wore no badge of rank, no mark of wealth, yet people unconsciously gave him space as they walked by, as if the air itself moved differently around him. Omega lifted her eyes, and her heart skipped. There was no number, no shimmer of light, no death, nothing. Her breath caught in her throat. For as long as she could remember, she had never met a person without an ending. Even newborns had faint glimmers above them, distant but real. But this man, there was only silence where his death should have been. She blinked, thinking perhaps she had looked away too quickly. She tried again. Still nothing. Her vision, her curse, it simply refused to speak. For the first time in her life, she felt fear not of what she could see, but of what she could not. He turned then, sensing her gaze. Their eyes met across the plaza. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. "You've been staring for a long time," he said, his voice carrying easily through the cool air. It was calm, deep, with a kind of stillness she had never heard in anyone before. "Are you looking for something, or someone?" Omega froze. No one had ever spoken to her like that, without fear, without the tremor of people who knew her name. She lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't mean to. See me?" he asked. She looked up again. "No. I mean, yes. She hesitated, unsure how to explain something no one had ever believed. "You don't have an ending." He raised an eyebrow, amused. "An ending? Everyone has one," she said quietly. "Everyone except you." He smiled then, a small, thoughtful curve of his lips that made her chest ache. "Maybe that means my story hasn't begun yet." And before she could ask what that meant, he turned and walked away. She watched him disappear into the moving crowd. The morning sun slid higher, painting the towers in bright gold, but all she saw was the empty space where he had been standing. All day, his words replayed in her mind. Maybe my story hasn't begun yet. What kind of person said something like that? What kind of person had no end? When night came, she returned to her observatory, her thoughts restless. She stood in front of her glass spheres, watching the dim light shift across them. Each one pulsed faintly with the image of a death she had witnessed. The room was full of stillness, yet she felt something moving beneath it, a new rhythm, a pulse not her own. She whispered to herself, "I see everything. I see too much. So why not him?" The clocks around her ticked in uneven harmony. Then, slowly, one by one, they began to stop. The sound faded until only silence remained. Omega lifted her head. The air in the observatory had changed. It felt heavy, suspended, as if the entire world was holding its breath. She stepped toward the window and looked out at the city. Lights flickered. Somewhere far below, a train halted mid-motion. Time itself seemed to hesitate. For a moment, she thought she saw him again, far off on a bridge that crossed the Silver River. He stood there beneath the twin moons, watching the stillness spreading across the city. Then, just as suddenly, time began to move again. The lights blinked back to life, the train continued its journey, and the clocks resumed their ticking. Everything returned to normal, except her heart, which beat faster than it ever had before. She pressed a hand against her chest. It felt warm, alive. Something had shifted in the order of things, something she could not name. The Omega, the woman who had spent her life surrounded by endings, felt for the first time the spark of a beginning. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she wrote in her book, the one where she kept all her observations about time and death. On a new page, she wrote a single sentence: "There is one without an ending. I must find him again." When dawn came, the city awoke in its usual rhythm. The markets opened, the airships rose, the towers gleamed. But somewhere beneath the ordinary hum of life, anew for days after their encounter, the city felt different to her. The rhythm of life, once predictable as the ticking of her clocks, now seemed uncertain. The people still moved through the streets, the towers still shimmered in the dawn, but something beneath it all had changed. It was as if the fabric of time had loosened its threads, and she could feel the fray with every breath. Omega wandered the markets and plazas where she had seen him, searching for the face that had vanished into the crowd. She did not know his name, only the echo of his voice, the impossible silence where his ending should have been. In every corner of the city of glass, she felt traces of him, small disturbances in the flow of time, moments that seemed to hesitate, to hold their breath. A lantern flickered too long before dimming. A bird paused in flight a heartbeat longer than it should have. The city itself was remembering something, or perhaps someone, who did not belong to its order. She began to see patterns in the days that followed. Every time she thought of him, the clocks slowed. Every time she dreamed of his eyes, the air around her grew heavy, the sound of the world softening into silence. It frightened her, yet she could not stop herself. She was drawn to the emptiness he had left behind like a tide drawn to the moon. At night, she watched the stars through the cracked glass dome above her observatory. They looked the same as they always had, cold, distant, eternal. Yet even the constellations seemed slightly altered, as if the universe itself had shifted a fraction of a degree the moment she had met him. There was a presence now, faint but constant, lingering at the edge of her perception. When she closed her eyes, she could feel it, like warmth pressed against her skin. It wasn't threatening, it was simply there, waiting, patient as the turning of a season. Sometimes she wondered if he felt it too, wherever he was. The city did not sleep easily anymore. Its machines hiccuped, its lights faltered, its data streams glitched in ways no engineer could explain. The scholars blamed solar interference. The believers whispered of prophecy. But Omega knew the truth. Time was not breaking. It was listening. In her solitude, she began to question the nature of her gift. For so long, she had believed it to be a burden, a cruel vision forced upon her for reasons she could never understand. But what if it was not punishment? What if she had been chosen, not to witness the end of all things, but to find the one thing that had no end? Perhaps the silence she saw when she looked at him was not emptiness, but eternity. The thought frightened her and comforted her all at once. On the fifth day, she ventured to the outer rim of the city, to a place where the glass towers gave way to fields of metal dust and fractured stone. Few people came there anymore. The wind carried echoes of old wars, and the earth itself was marked with the scars of ancient machines. It was here, among the ruins, that she felt the strongest pull. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the plains. The air shimmered faintly with heat, and the sky deepened into violet. She stood on a broken bridge that stretched over a dry riverbed, her cloak rippling around her. There was no sound except the distant hum of the city behind her. Then, as the last light touched the horizon, she felt it again, that pause in time, that breathless stillness. The world seemed to tilt. Dust hung suspended in the air. The ticking in her mind stopped. For a moment, she thought she saw him standing at the far end of the bridge, a dark figure against the fading sun. But when she blinked, he was gone. Only the silence remained. She turned back toward the city, but even from here, she could see its pulse faltering. The lights of the towers flickered, entire districts dimming as if swallowed by shadow. She could almost hear the panic rising, voices calling out, machines stuttering, time stalling in every corner. She knew, without understanding how, that the cause of it all was bound to him. Wherever the Alpha went, time bent to his presence. She returned to her observatory and recorded what she had felt, though the words seemed too small for what she had witnessed. Her handwriting trembled. She wrote of the stillness, of the shadows that stretched too long, of the faint hum that filled the air when everything else was quiet. But above all, she wrote of the sense that something immense was waiting to awaken. The following nights were restless. She could no longer sleep. Each time her eyes closed, she saw fragments of something vast, wheels of light turning in endless darkness, a great clock of stars suspended above a sea of glass. And always, at the center of it, stood the same figure, the Alpha, his eyes reflecting the cosmos, his hands reaching toward her as if to bridge the infinite distance between them. When she woke, her skin glowed faintly with patterns she could not explain, tiny constellations of light that faded by dawn. She hid them beneath her sleeves, but their warmth lingered. The more she thought of him, the stronger they burned. It was as though he had marked her, not with touch, but with time itself. The city continued to unravel. Days blurred, hours stretched and folded, entire minutes vanished, swallowed by invisible currents. Some said time had become sick, infected by a paradox no one could name. But Omega understood. She had seen the moment it began, the second their eyes met across the plaza. Her gift was no longer obeying her. She looked at people now and saw their endings dissolve into mist. The numbers above their heads flickered, sometimes vanishing altogether. The future itself was slipping from her grasp, scattering like dust in the wind. For the first time in her existence, she was blind to death, and in that blindness, she felt something like freedom. She began to imagine what it would be like to live without knowing. To speak to someone and not see their final breath hovering over them. To love without counting the days until the loss. The thought filled her with terror, and yet, it also filled her with longing. Perhaps this was what ordinary people felt all their lives, the sweetness of uncertainty, the fragile beauty of not knowing when it would all end. She realized then that she did not want to return to the way things were. She would find him again, not to understand him, but to understand herself. Each evening she stood by her window, waiting for the silence to return. She had begun to notice its rhythm. It came like a tide, every few hours, washing over the city in waves. Sometimes it lasted only seconds, sometimes minutes. But with each passing day, it grew stronger. It was spreading, and she was its witness. One night, as the silence descended once more, the stars above the city flickered out for a heartbeat, plunging the world into darkness. And in that darkness, she heard something, faint, distant, but unmistakable. A sound like a single word carried on the wind. Her name. The air trembled, and she felt it again, the pull, the gravity of his existence drawing her forward. She closed her eyes and saw a vision, clearer than any she had ever seen, a place beyond the city, where the earth broke open into a valley of mirrors, reflecting a sky filled with falling stars. And at the center of it, he was waiting. When the silence lifted, she opened her eyes, trembling but calm. For the first time since her gift had awakened, she felt certain of what she had to do. She gathered her cloak, extinguished the lights in her observatory, and stepped into the dawn. Behind her, the clocks continued to tick, but their rhythm was no longer steady. Time was unraveling, and she was walking willingly into the heart of its unraveling, drawn by the one man who did not belong to its laws. Road beyond the city of glass had not been walked in centuries. It wound through valleys of dust and memory, through plains where the wind whispered the remnants of voices that once sang. The towers behind her shimmered faintly in the distance, their light fading like dying stars. Omega did not look back. For the first time in her life, the pull of the future outweighed the comfort of the known. She moved with purpose, though she did not know where the path would lead. The silence that had haunted the city followed her, soft and steady as her own heartbeat. At times it pressed close, wrapping her in a stillness so complete that even her breath seemed to echo. At other times it receded, letting the faint hum of the living world return. It was not a silence of emptiness, it was the sound of something vast, something waiting. The terrain changed as she walked. The smooth glass streets gave way to cracked marble, then to stone, then to soil. She passed through forests of silver trees whose leaves had turned to dust, and through fields where forgotten machines slumbered half buried in the ground, their metal bones gleaming beneath the moonlight. Everywhere she went, time seemed hesitant, as if unsure how to flow around her. A bird hung motionless mid-flight until she blinked. The wind froze in place, carrying the scent of rain that never fell. Even her own shadow sometimes lagged behind, stretching thin before catching up. She began to wonder if she herself was still part of the same timeline she had left behind, or if she had already crossed into another. By the fourth day, the landscape grew stranger. The stars changed position. Mountains rose where none had been before. Rivers glowed with quiet luminescence, and the air itself shimmered with faint echoes of light. It was as if the world had slipped its boundaries and rewritten itself around her footsteps. The fabric of reality was thinner here, translucent enough that she could sometimes glimpse the workings beneath it, a clockwork of light and motion, the hidden machinery of time itself. And in every pause of the wind, she felt him. The Alpha, not as a sound or image, but as a presence that filled the horizon, guiding her onward. It was like being drawn by gravity, gentle, inevitable. Sometimes she thought she could feel his heartbeat beneath the earth, a slow, deliberate rhythm that matched her own. At night, she rested beneath the open sky. Sleep came in fragments, in flashes of vision that blurred the line between dream and memory. She saw him walking through the same landscapes, his figure distant but luminous, leaving no footprints behind. She saw him standing before a vast gate made of light, watching her approach from beyond it. And sometimes she saw herself reflected in his eyes, not as the seer she had been, but as something else, something unbound by time. The dreams grew more vivid as she drew closer. In one, she found herself in a place where time was visible, a sea of golden dust suspended in darkness, each grain a moment, each wave an era. Alpha stood there, watching the currents shift and collide. He reached out his hand, and when his fingers brushed hers, the entire sea rippled. The past folded into the future, and for an instant, everything that had ever lived or would ever live existed at once. She woke gasping, her skin glowing faintly with light that faded at dawn. The mark on her wrist, the faint constellation that had appeared after their first meeting, now burned brighter, its pattern slowly expanding, forming a shape she did not recognize. It pulsed in rhythm with her heart. She continued her journey through lands where time had begun to decay. She passed villages frozen in eternal twilight, where the people moved in loops, repeating the same gestures endlessly, a woman forever drawing water from an empty well, a child forever chasing a kite that never lifted from the ground. They were ghosts of time, trapped in the malfunctioning weave of reality. Omega moved quietly among them, her heart aching for their stillness. Each one carried the echo of a life that had once been alive, now suspended between breath and silence. As she walked among them, she began to realize something profound. Her power, the sight of endings, was fading, but in its place, something else was awakening. She could no longer see death, but she could feel possibility. She could sense the threads of choice, the delicate shimmer of what could be instead of what must be. It was overwhelming, chaotic, beautiful. She had spent her entire existence in a world of fixed fates, and now, suddenly, she could feel the freedom that came from uncertainty. The silence that had once frightened her now comforted her. It was no longer the silence of the grave but the silence before creation, the breath the universe takes before it speaks a new word. She began to understand that the Alpha was not simply a man who existed outside of time, he was a part of whatever force was rewriting it. And somehow, she was now part of it too. On the seventh day, she reached the edge of the valley she had seen in her vision, a vast expanse of mirrors stretching as far as the eye could see. Each mirror reflected a different sky, a different version of the same world. Some showed her walking toward the horizon, others showed her turning back. Some showed her alive, others fading into light. It was the place between realities, the space where choices became destinies. She stood at the threshold, staring at the endless reflections. The silence was absolute here, heavy and alive. Even the stars above did not move. And then she felt it, the unmistakable pulse of his presence, closer than ever. The air shifted, and the mirrors began to hum, faint at first, then louder, resonating with the rhythm of her heartbeat. In the reflection before her, she saw him appear, not behind her, not in the distance, but within the mirrored world itself. His figure was tall, cloaked in shadow and light at once. His eyes, calm and ancient, looked directly into hers. She reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of the mirror. It rippled like water, warm to the touch. The silence deepened until it felt like the whole universe was holding its breath. And in that stillness, she felt a shift inside herself, something vast awakening, something that had been waiting since the beginning of time. Her heartbeat merged with the hum of the mirrors, and she felt as though she was standing at the edge of creation itself, suspended between what had been and what could be. Then the ground trembled. The mirrors cracked, not with violence, but with light. The reflections shattered into fragments, each nay showing a different future, 1,000 paths branching outward, each leading to a different version of herself and him. She saw lives where they were strangers, lives where they were lovers, lives where they never met, and lives where they built worlds together. It was too much to bear. She fell to her knees, the visions flooding through her, filling her with every possible ending. And yet, through all of it, one thing remained constant. He was always there, in every version, watching her, waiting for her to understand. The light faded slowly, leaving her trembling in the silence. The mirrors had gone dark, their reflections gone. Only one remained unbroken before her, and in its depths, she saw not her reflection but his. He did not speak, yet she understood. The Alpha was not the absence of an ending. He was the embodiment of the beginning, the point where time renews itself, where endings become births. He was the balance to her sight, the other half of what she had been created to be. As the dawn rose over the valley, Omega stood, her heart steady, her fear gone. For the first time, she did not feel alone in her gift. For the first time, she saw herself not as the Omega, the last, but as part of a circle that had never truly ended. She knew now that her journey was only beginning. The silence around her no longer felt heavy, it felt like promise. The universe was changing, and she was changing with it. The valley of mirrors lay silent behind her. When Omega stepped beyond its edge, the air itself seemed to dissolve. There was no horizon, no sky, no earth, only an endless light without source or shadow. She felt her body grow weightless, her thoughts slowing until they moved in rhythm with the invisible pulse that filled this place. It was not emptiness, it was the space between moments, the breath the universe takes when it turns from one heartbeat to the next. She understood then that she had crossed outside of time. Every sense she possessed had changed shape. Sight became memory, sound became thought, and feeling became a kind of gravity that pulled her gently forward. She could sense the flow of everything that ever was, a current of histories, of worlds being born and dissolving again. Each flicker of light carried a story, a civilization rising, a child taking a first breath, a star collapsing into itself. All of it happening together, all of it still unfinished. The current recognized her. It moved around her the way water bends around a stone, acknowledging what she was, an observer of endings, and what she had become, something new, a being without a fixed horizon. For the first time, she was not looking at death from the outside. She was standing inside the pattern that created it. Within the endless light she saw shapes forming. Faint outlines of things that might have been places once. Bridges made of starlight, rivers flowing upward into the dark, towers that folded into themselves like reflections. Everywhere she looked, the world rebuilt itself from memory. Fragments of the city of glass drifted past her. A window, a child's laughter caught in crystal, the hum of machinery that no longer existed. They were memories of time, trying to find a place to rest. The pulse grew stronger. It came from ahead, steady and vast, like the beating heart of creation. She followed it, not walking but moving by thought alone. Each step drew her closer to the source of the silence that had followed her since the beginning. And then she saw him. The Alpha stood in the center of the light. He was not as she remembered from the plaza. Here, his form shifted like liquid radiance, sometimes human, sometimes pure energy. Around him, the fabric of time coiled and uncoiled, spinning threads of possibility that glimmered like silver rain. He was both still and in motion, both present and infinite. The sight of him filled her with an emotion she could not name, a mix of awe, recognition, and peace. She moved closer, and the current changed direction, flowing through her instead of around her. Images rushed into her mind, countless worlds where she and the Alpha existed in different forms, sometimes as light, sometimes as voice, sometimes as the faint vibration that holds a universe together. In each world, they found each other again. It was not love in the way mortals understood it. It was gravity. It was the way creation sought balance. She felt the meaning of his existence unfold within her. He was not a person who had escaped death, he was the renewal hidden inside it. Where she had seen endings, he carried beginnings. Every life that ended in her sight became a spark in his keeping, a seed of what would come next. The cycle they formed had no start, no finish. It only turned, endlessly, like the slow rotation of galaxies. The light around them deepened, and within that radiance she began to see the thread of her own life stretching backward and forward at once. She saw the day her power had awakened, the moment she had met him in the city, and far beyond that, the instant before she had been born, a point of light leaving his hands, falling into the world as a promise. She had been part of him all along, a fragment of the same force separated so that the universe could know itself through opposites. She had been given the eyes to see the end, he had been given the heart to begin again. The realization filled her with quiet joy. For centuries she had carried the weight of every death she witnessed, believing herself cursed. Now she understood that she had never been the cause of those endings. She had been the witness who ensured they were seen, and through that witnessing, they became part of something greater. Nothing truly vanished, it simply changed its shape and returned to the source. The Alpha's light grew warmer, and she felt it touch the space where her heart had always ached. The pain that had lived there dissolved, replaced by a calm so deep it bordered on eternity. She understood without words that he was offering her a choice. She could remain as she was, half in the world of time, half beyond, or she could step fully into the current with him, becoming part of the rhythm that turned endings into beginnings. She hesitated. In her memory, the city of glass still glimmered, fragile and imperfect, filled with lives that continued to burn in the dark. She thought of the people she had watched, the faces she had avoided because she could not bear to know their fates. She thought of the beauty hidden inside their briefness, the laughter, the grief, the way they built meaning from moments they knew would not last. It was because of their impermanence that they shone so brightly. She realized she did not want to abandon that world entirely. It needed someone who could remind it that endings were not punishment but passage. She wanted to return, not as a seer cursed with knowledge, but as a guardian of possibility, a voice that could tell others what she had learned here, that nothing ever truly ends. The current understood her decision. The light around her shifted, folding into wings of energy that shimmered with countless reflections of time. The Alpha's gaze held hers, and though no words passed between them, she felt his approval, quiet and absolute. He would remain here, at the heart of the cycle, ensuring that beginnings always followed endings. She would return to the living world, carrying his silence with her. The light began to dim. The current reversed, drawing her backward through the folds of creation. Worlds blurred past, oceans boiling into clouds, mountains rising from dust, cities blooming and fading like breath. She saw the city of glass again, suspended in dawn. The streets gleamed with early light, the people moved once more, unaware that time had almost stopped. When she stepped onto the glass pavement, the silence came with her, soft but steady. Her observatory still stood at the edge of the city, the clocks within it motionless. She touched one, and it began to tick again, not in the old way but with a rhythm that matched her heart. Each beat carried a whisper of what she had seen beyond time. She looked out over the city and smiled. The towers caught the morning sun, scattering light like promise. She could no longer see numbers above people's heads, the visions of death were gone. Instead, when she looked at someone, she saw threads of light stretching outward, choices, chances, beginnings waiting to be born. The Omega was no longer the witness of endings. She had become the keeper of renewal. Far above, in the place beyond the stars, the Alpha's pulse echoed once more, steady as creation itself. The universe breathed, and with that breath, time began anew. When Omega returned to the city of glass, it was neither the same city she had left nor entirely different. The towers still shimmered in morning light, but the edges of buildings seemed softer now, as if the structures themselves had exhaled and relaxed after centuries of tension. The streets gleamed with dew and light, reflecting 1,000 possibilities in each pane of glass. She felt the city breathe beneath her feet, a subtle rhythm that pulsed like a heartbeat, familiar and yet strange. She walked slowly, letting her senses adjust to the ordinary flow of time, though she knew that nothing about her was ordinary anymore. Each step she took left a faint shimmer in the air, a trace of the currents she had walked beyond time. The wind seemed to recognize her, carrying whispers of movement and choice, brushing her hair with the gentle acknowledgement of a world realigned. She could feel threads of life stretching through the city, fragile yet resilient, waiting to be guided rather than ended. The people she passed were unaware of the change in her. Faces turned to her with casual curiosity, and she realized with a quiet astonishment that she no longer saw death hovering over them. Instead, she perceived the subtle threads of potential, paths each person could take, moments of decision shimmering faintly like silver ribbons. It was not power she had known before, it was freedom, a clarity that allowed her to see the endless ripple of possibility in the simplest choices. She entered the plaza where she had first met the Alpha. The fountain was still dry, the water long vanished, yet the stones glimmered with memory. She knelt and touched the edge of the basin. A tiny pulse of light ran through the stone, as if greeting her return. The city remembered her, and in remembering, it began to shift ever so slightly. From the observatory, she could hear the faint ticking of clocks resuming their rhythm. Time was not fully restored, it had gained depth, layers, and almost musical complexity. She walked toward the windows and looked down at the city from above. The streets, the towers, even the people themselves moved not in straight lines, but along invisible currents, like leaves floating on the subtle tides of choice. Each step someone took was a note in a larger symphony she could now hear. Omega wandered among the city's people, watching the lives unfold in gentle, radiant arcs. A child stumbled and laughed, and the thread of her future sparkled faintly, branching in dozens of ways that could lead to courage, joy, or mischief. A woman argued with herself over a simple choice, and the ribbon of potential stretched and curled, waiting for her decision. The threads did not tell Omega what must happen, they whispered only what could. For the first time, she felt her gift as a blessing rather than a burden. She had once carried the weight of endings on her shoulders, seeing death in every corner. Now, she carried beginnings. Each life she touched could grow, shift, bloom in ways previously unimaginable. The city was alive in a way it had never been before, conscious not of Omega alone, but of the space between what was and what could be. Days passed without notice, though time itself no longer felt rigid. The city moved, but with a gentleness she had never known. The people around her began to change in subtle ways. Smiles lingered longer, laughter echoed more clearly, hesitation gave way to courage. And though they did not know why, there was a quiet warmth in the city, as though some invisible hand had tuned it to the frequency of possibility. Omega returned to familiar places. The narrow streets of her childhood, the quiet alleys where shadows had once seemed too heavy, the parks where she had first learned to watch the world. Everywhere she went, threads of light responded to her presence, shimmering faintly like fireflies in the corners of vision. It was as if she had become the keeper of potential, the guide for paths yet untraveled. She thought of the Alpha, though he was not with her. She felt him in the rhythm of the city, in the pulse beneath the glass, in the quiet spaces between breaths. He had remained beyond time to preserve balance, but she carried his gift now, weaving it into the lives around her. She realized then that beginnings and endings were never separate, they were reflections of one another, two halves of a single force. And she had become the bridge between them. As the sun set over the city, Omega climbed to the highest tower, where glass panels stretched toward the sky. She gazed out at the horizon, where towers shimmered and streets curved in impossible patterns. The city had always been fragile, but now it was alive in a different way. The light of possibility stretched across every surface, every reflection, every shadow. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the threads of lives intertwine with her own. She no longer feared endings, for she knew they were not final. She no longer feared the weight of her gift, for it was now a blessing shared with every life she touched. The Omega had become more than a witness, She had become a guide, a guardian, a part of the living rhythm of the universe. And as the night deepened, the city glimmered with quiet promise. Somewhere beyond the stars, the Alpha's pulse continued, steady and eternal, echoing through her heart. She had returned to her world, yet she carried the currents of creation with her. She had become the light that threaded through possibility, the beginning within every ending, the hope in every shadow. The city awoke under a soft dawn that seemed different from any before. Light filtered through the glass towers in gentle arcs, refracting into faint rainbows that shimmered across streets and plazas. Omega walked among the waking city, her steps silent but purposeful, sensing the threads of possibility stretching before her like invisible rivers. Every movement, every choice the people made seemed to respond to her presence, subtle, unspoken, but undeniable. It began in small ways. A man walking briskly to work paused to help a child who had dropped a book. The thread of that choice glimmered faintly in Omega's perception, radiating outward like ripples on water. She felt a warmth rising in her chest as she realized the effect she could have, not dictating lives, not forcing outcomes, but awakening the potential that had always existed. She wandered through the marketplaces where merchants displayed goods in neat rows. A woman argued silently with herself over which herbs to sell, and Omega felt the potential paths of that choice stretch outward. One leading to fortune, another to kindness, another to misfortune that could teach resilience. The threads shimmered like gossamer, delicate yet strong, and Omega reached out, not with her hands, but with her presence, a gentle nudging that allowed clarity to settle over hesitation. The city's architecture seemed to notice her too. Windows reflected not just light but possibility. The streets bent slightly as if to guide those who wandered, the bridges leaned toward those who had once been lost. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The world itself bending to the rhythm she carried. She climbed to the old observatory once more. From this vantage, she could see the entire city laid out beneath her. Each person moved along countless invisible threads, a complex tapestry of decisions, actions, and consequences. And among them, she could see the faint outlines of moments that had yet to happen. Lives on the verge of change, hearts on the verge of opening, choices waiting to be made. Omega realized that her presence did not erase struggle. She could see moments of doubt, moments of grief, moments of hesitation. But she also saw the potential in those moments, the chance for courage, for forgiveness, for growth. She understood that guidance was not interference, it was illumination, a quiet showing of what could be. Without imposing what must. In the evening, she walked through a park where the trees whispered in the wind. Children played, laughing and tumbling over each other. Parents watched, some unaware of the lives that shimmered around them, some intuitively sensing the subtle shift in the air. Omega felt the threads of joy stretching outward, connecting one soul to another in delicate patterns. She realized she had become more than observer, she had become a channel, a conduit through which possibility flowed. As night fell, the city transformed again. Lights from the towers reflected off the glass streets, scattering into 1,000 points of soft brilliance. The people moved slower now, their choices deliberate yet natural, as if the city itself had learned to breathe in rhythm with the pulse Omega carried. She sensed that her presence had given the city patience, a deeper understanding of its own heartbeat. Omega's thoughts returned to the Alpha. Though he remained beyond the bounds of time, she felt him here in every subtle shift, every moment of potential she touched. The pulse of beginnings was constant, echoing within her as she guided the threads of the living world. She realized that though their work was separate, his at the source, hers among the manifestations, they were inseparable in purpose, one sustaining the cycle of creation, the other nurturing the worlds it touched. She stood atop the highest tower, gazing out at the lights of the city below. The streets shimmered with the faint glow of countless possibilities, a luminous web of what could be. The city was alive in a way she had never imagined, breathing with potential, stretching toward futures that had once seemed impossible. She understood, with quiet awe, that she was no longer bound by the fear of endings. She had become the embodiment of what comes after, the guardian of the space between what was and what could be. The night deepened, and the city's rhythm slowed to a gentle pulse, the kind that promised both rest and awakening. Omega closed her eyes, feeling the threads of the world vibrate beneath her touch, resonating with the calm certainty of life unfolding. She knew there would be challenges, moments when people faltered, when choices led to pain or confusion. But she also knew that each thread she touched carried a spark, and within that spark, the possibility for renewal, for courage, for hope. And so the Omega walked among the living, unseen but present, her gift no longer a burden but a blessing. The city slept and breathed, the threads of possibility stretching into the distance, and she moved through it all with a calm certainty, knowing that endings were only beginnings in disguise, that the story of life would continue to unfold in ways both gentle and magnificent. Somewhere beyond the stars, the Alpha's pulse continued to echo. Omega felt it in every flicker of light, every movement of life, a reminder that she was part of something larger, eternal, and infinitely beautiful. The city had changed in ways almost imperceptible, yet Omega could feel the tension beneath its surface. Not all threads of possibility moved smoothly, some tangled, twisted, and knotted in ways that reminded her that life, even guided by hope, could be unpredictable. She wandered through the early morning streets, her steps light on the glass pavement, listening to the quiet hum of potential that filled every corner. Somewhere in the marketplace, a young man hesitated at the edge of a decision that would alter the course of his life. He wanted to leave the city in search of fortune elsewhere, yet the thread of connection that bound him to family and friends pulled in another direction. Omega watched as the ribbon of possibility shivered, caught between courage and fear. She could not force him to act, nor could she remove the uncertainty. All she could do was breathe with the rhythm of his choices, gently nudging the current toward clarity without imposing a path. In the narrow alleys, children played among shadows that stretched longer in the early light. One stumbled and scraped a knee, and the threads of potential for that small moment unfurled in intricate spirals. A lesson in resilience, a spark of compassion from a friend, a moment of frustration that could become patience or stubbornness. Omega knelt beside the child and whispered a soft, unspoken encouragement, a quiet resonance that infused the air around them. The thread shimmered brighter for an instant, and the child's cry became a laugh, fragile but sincere. The city's architecture seemed alive to her presence. Towers leaned ever so slightly toward each other, forming invisible bridges that encouraged movement and interaction. Windows reflected faint possibilities, images of paths not yet taken, lives not yet shaped, moments waiting for attention. Omega understood that her gift was not about preventing pain or ensuring happiness. It was about illuminating the landscape of choice, about showing the hidden pathways that life might take. Yet, even with her guidance, there were threads that resisted. A merchant refused to listen to advice whispered through possibility, insisting on a path that led to loss. A scholar clung stubbornly to old knowledge, unable to see the chance for discovery in failure. Omega felt the tension coil around these lives, a knot of determination and fear. She realized that not all struggles could be softened, some needed to be experienced fully for growth to occur. Her presence could offer insight, but it could not erase consequence. In the heart of the city, the central square shimmered with a delicate glow. People moved within it as though caught in a web of light, their lives intersecting in ways both visible and invisible. Omega stood at the center and closed her eyes, sensing the threads that connected them all. Some stretched taut, ready to snap, others looped and curled in gentle spirals. Every choice, every hesitation, every act of courage or fear, radiated outward. She realized that guiding possibilities was like tending a garden. Some seeds needed sunlight, others needed shade, some needed patience, and some needed to fall where they may. A sudden ripple of tension reached her senses. A dispute had broken out between two families, a misunderstanding fueled by fear and pride. The threads of their choices intertwined violently, threatening to unravel a delicate pattern of harmony she had nurtured. Omega took a deep breath, letting her awareness extend into the chaos. She did not intervene with force, instead, she infused the space with quiet potential. Small sparks of empathy and understanding flickered in the minds of those involved, choices made visible that had been hidden by anger. Slowly, like dawn pushing through fog, the threads untangled. Words softened, hands released, and a small, tentative understanding formed. The knot had not disappeared entirely, but it had been eased, allowed to heal naturally. As the day wore on, Omega walked through the quieter neighborhoods. She paused to watch a man teaching his child to read, a woman planting flowers along a narrow street, an old couple holding hands as they crossed the glass bridge. Each thread of life shimmered faintly, carrying within it countless possibilities. She realized that her presence did not have to be grand to matter. Even small, subtle nudges, quiet resonances of encouragement and awareness, could ripple outward to create profound change. By evening, she climbed the tallest tower once again. The city stretched beneath her, bathed in the soft glow of lanterns and refracted light. Threads of possibility shimmered in the air, visible only to her, weaving intricate patterns of action, choice, and consequence. She felt the pulse of the Alpha far beyond the stars, steady and reassuring. Though he remained in the currents of creation, she sensed him in every thread she touched, a silent partner in the unfolding symphony of life. Omega understood that guiding possibility was not about control, nor about erasing hardship. It was about awareness, about giving life the space to unfold with clarity and intention. She had become the quiet force that allowed the city to breathe, the subtle hand that nurtured growth without imposing direction, the guardian of paths not yet walked. And as night deepened, the city glimmered with an inner lie. Faint but steady. Every life, every choice, every moment of hesitation or courage radiated outward, shaping a world that was vibrant, alive, and full of potential. Omega stood there, calm and patient, knowing that endings had been transformed into beginnings, that struggle had been transformed into growth, and that she was, in every quiet way, the guiding pulse of possibility itself. Somewhere beyond time, the Alpha's rhythm continued, steady as ever, echoing through her consciousness. She felt it as a promise, a reminder that the universe always moved forward, that every thread, every choice, every life had its place in the grand tapestry. Omega exhaled, letting the pulse of potential flow through her, letting the city move, breathe, and grow around her. She was no longer merely the Omega. She had become the guardian of possibility, the quiet light threading through lives, the unseen guide leading the world toward endless beginnings. The city had settled into a rhythm that felt almost eternal, yet beneath its calm, Omega sensed the subtle tremors of imbalance. The threads of possibility she had nurtured were strong and vibrant, yet not all of them flowed smoothly. Some had grown tangled, knotted by fear, misunderstanding, or stubbornness. She could feel their tension pulsing like low, persistent waves under the glass streets. For the first time, Omega realized that even a city shaped by possibility could face moments of genuine crisis. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. In the Eastern District, a series of small disagreements escalated. Misunderstandings between merchants over resources, neighbors quarreling over petty grievances, and scholars disputing over knowledge started to form patterns that radiated outward. The threads that connected people, normally fluid and flexible, began to tighten and twist. The air itself felt heavier, charged with tension. Omega walked through the streets, her senses stretching to the edges of the disturbance. She could see the web of potential outcomes, some leading to reconciliation, others spiraling toward chaos, but none were yet fixed. A child ran into her path, frightened by the loud shouts echoing from nearby. She knelt, placing her hands gently on the child's shoulders. In that moment, she extended a quiet resonance of calm into the child's awareness. The child's fear lessened, the small thread of courage shining faintly, and the child ran back to safety. Omega felt the first ripple of relief spread outward, though she knew it was only temporary. The tension in the city would not resolve without effort. She climbed to the observation tower, seeking perspective. From above, the city looked serene, bathed in soft sunlight. But Omega could see the invisible threads writhing and interweaving below, some glowing faintly with hope, others pulsing with conflict. The Alpha's presence, distant yet steady, resonated through her, a reminder that the universe always maintained balance, even when chaos seemed near. She felt a subtle fear, but it was tempered by determination. She had never faced such a widespread disturbance before, but her role as the guardian of possibility was not bound by ease. Descending from the tower, Omega moved toward the Eastern District. She felt the threads tighten around a central plaza, where the conflict seemed to converge. People stood in heated argument, gestures sharp and voices raised. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, there were glimmers of potential, A young woman's desire to apologize, a man's hesitation before retaliation, a child's innocent laughter capable of cutting through tension like sunlight through fog. Omega focused on those threads, breathing patience and understanding into the space. The energy around her shifted subtly. People paused, their anger slightly diminished, their words softer. Omega could sense the countless choices branching outward, some leading to resolution, some to further friction. She did not push, did not direct, she merely allowed clarity to enter the moment. Slowly, one by one, the threads untangled, though not perfectly. Some threads were stubborn, resistant, shaped by pride or fear. She let them remain, knowing that sometimes growth came through struggle. As evening approached, Omega wandered the quieter neighborhoods, feeling the remnants of tension in small pockets. A scholar had locked herself in a room, frustrated by failed experiments and failed attempts to communicate. Omega placed a hand lightly on the glass of the window, sending a gentle pulse of encouragement. In the scholar's mind, new ideas began to form, not forced, but emerging naturally. A lost opportunity now gleamed as a chance to learn, a challenge that could become triumph. In the city square, the fountain, long dry, began to shimmer faintly. Light reflected in delicate arcs across the ground, dancing along the threads of potential. People walking nearby paused, their movements becoming more fluid, more thoughtful. Omega felt the tension easing, the web of possibility returning to balance, not through control, but through guidance and awareness. Night fell, and the city glimmered softly under the stars. Omega stood atop the tallest tower, looking down at the streets below. The city had faced its first real crisis since she had returned, and though not all threads were perfectly aligned, a sense of resilience had emerged. She understood now that guiding possibility was not about preventing hardship. It was about allowing life to encounter challenge, to grow stronger through struggle, to discover new paths even in moments of darkness. The Alpha's presence reached her like a distant heartbeat, constant and reassuring. Omega smiled faintly, feeling a connection that transcended space and time. She had faced uncertainty, tension, and chaos, yet she had guided without forcing, allowed without controlling. The threads of life shimmered with new potential, strengthened by the challenge, more intricate and beautiful than ever. Omega exhaled, letting the calm of the night soak into the city. The crisis had passed, not erased, but transformed. Possibility flowed more richly now, threaded through every life, every decision, every quiet moment of courage or compassion. She realized that this was her true gift, not merely to foresee or to intervene, but to awaken the inherent potential in life itself, even when that life was messy, chaotic, or resistant. The city slept, but beneath the quiet surface, it pulsed with the newfound energy of lessons learned, choices made, and paths discovered. Omega remained atop the tower, patient and vigilant, a quiet guardian of endless beginnings. The threads shimmered in the starlight, intertwining endlessly, and she felt a serene certainty. The world would continue to unfold, radiant and alive, under her watchful, gentle guidance. Somewhere far beyond the stars, the Alpha's pulse echoed. Omega felt it not as control, but as partnership, a reminder that creation and guidance were forever intertwined, that endings and beginnings were one, and that she, the Omega, had become the living embodiment of possibility. The city awoke in a light that felt different, gentle, golden, and alive with a quiet anticipation. Omega walked among the streets, feeling the threads of possibility pulse more vividly than before. The previous crisis had left its mark. Some threads had strengthened, others had shifted, but all of them carried a newfound resilience. It was as if the city itself had learned to breathe differently, to move with purpose and awareness, yet still embrace unpredictability. People were emerging from their homes with renewed energy. The marketplace buzzed with lively chatter. Merchants greeted one another with cautious warmth, neighbors shared smiles that carried unspoken forgiveness, and children ran freely, their laughter threading through the air. Omega walked slowly, observing each person, each choice, each subtle hesitation. She understood that guidance was no longer just a matter of nudging possibilities, it had become a process of nurturing growth, of allowing life to realize its own potential in the smallest, most intricate ways. She paused at the corner where the young man had once hesitated over leaving the city. Today, he stood with a small smile, teaching a group of children to read from books he had collected. Omega felt the thread of his voice radiate outward, connecting with countless others. Each child's laughter, each question asked, each moment of understanding shimmered like tiny lights in the tapestry of life. The ripple of potential extended far beyond what he or anyone could see. In the central square, the fountain, now fully flowing, reflected the sun in delicate arcs. People gathered near it, some resting on benches, others conversing in soft tones. Omega walked through the crowd, sensing the web of decisions and possibilities surrounding each person. A woman chose to share her bread with a hungry child. A man decided to help an elderly neighbor carry water. A scholar offered her newfound knowledge to a group of curious listeners. Each action, seemingly small, strengthened the invisible threads that bound the city together. Omega's steps led her to the high bridge overlooking the river. From there, she could see the city's full pulse, its life reflected in the sparkling water below. Threads of potential glimmered in every direction, interweaving, branching, and looping in patterns that were endlessly intricate yet harmonious. She realized that the city was beginning to understand itself, not consciously, not intentionally, but in a subtle, organic way. Its people were learning to navigate possibility, to embrace choice, and to act with awareness, guided by the faint, unseen presence of her influence. A soft wind stirred, carrying with it the scents of flowers, baked bread, and the river. Omega closed her eyes, feeling the threads hum beneath her touch. Every moment of kindness, every act of courage, every decision born from reflection sent ripples across the tapestry of life. She could feel the joy, the hope, and the love embedded in each choice, and she understood that her work was not to control these threads, but to honor them, to help them flourish without imposing limitation. In the evening, she descended to the park, where families gathered and children played under the fading light. She watched as two strangers, drawn together by circumstance, shared a quiet conversation that would blossom into a lifelong friendship. A musician strummed a gentle tune, and people paused, absorbing the melody and letting it lift the weight of the day from their hearts. Omega could feel the threads of connection strengthening, weaving people into patterns that were both delicate and enduring. The night arrived, and the city transformed under the soft glow of lanterns and reflected starlight. From her vantage point atop the tallest tower, Omega observed the entire web of life stretching outward, each thread shimmering with potential yet grounded in the choices that had been made. She could see the alpha's pulse far beyond the stars, steady and reassuring, a distant reminder that creation and guidance were intertwined, eternal and unbroken. Omega realized that the city had reached a new stage. It was no longer fragile, nor simply resilient, it had begun to thrive in its full complexity. Its people were learning to move within the currents of possibility, not by knowing every outcome, but by trusting in their own choices and in the subtle guidance woven into the threads around them. She felt a deep, serene satisfaction. The city was alive, fully alive, and she had helped it awaken to its own power without removing its freedom. She lingered atop the tower, gazing out at the streets that glittered like veins of light. Each path, each choice, each ripple of potential carried within it the promise of growth, of courage, of joy. Omega understood that happiness was not a guarantee, it was a possibility, nurtured patiently, respected, and allowed to flourish. And tonight, the city shimmered with happiness, fragile yet persistent, like the glow of fireflies against the darkness. The alpha's pulse echoed faintly in her consciousness, a reminder that she was part of something far larger than herself. Yet in this moment, she felt entirely present, grounded, and radiant. She was the Omega, the guardian of possibility, the quiet force threading through lives, lifting them without control, guiding without force. And the city, alive with the hum of countless choices, glimmered with infinite potential. Omega knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, the tapestry of life would continue to unfold, beautiful, intricate, and endlessly vibrant. The city woke to a morning that felt as if it had been waiting for this very day, light spilling in golden streams, reflecting off glass streets and water, warming every corner, every heart. Omega moved through the streets, feeling a profound stillness beneath the hum of life, a quiet certainty that something monumental had begun to unfold. The threads of possibility shimmered brighter than ever, interwoven with a depth and richness that made her chest tighten with awe. After all she had guided, after every hesitation, every ripple of fear or doubt, the city was poised on the brink of something extraordinary, a true awakening of its collective potential. Everywhere she looked, she saw the subtle beauty of choice fully realized. In the marketplace, a child offered a flower to an elder, who accepted it with tears and a quiet smile. Merchants worked together seamlessly, their gestures of trust and collaboration lighting threads that had once been dim with conflict. Omega's eyes followed the countless patterns of action and consequence, each line weaving into another, forming a tapestry more intricate than anything she had seen before. This was life thriving on its own terms, not because she nudged it, but because she had nurtured the conditions for growth. In the central square, the fountain had become a gathering place for the city's people. Musicians played, and the music carried through the streets like liquid warmth. Families and friends, strangers and neighbors, shared laughter, food, and stories. The threads of connection were strong and visible even to her, stretching outward, looping together in ways that suggested not only harmony but resilience, joy, and creativity. Omega realized that the city was no longer simply surviving, it was fully awake, fully alive. She paused to watch a young couple teaching dance steps to children on the fountain steps. Every twirl, every stumble, every laugh sent ripples across the threads, threading joy into people who were not even present, an invisible network of happiness stretching through the city. Omega's heart lifted as she realized something profound. Her guidance had been successful not because she controlled lives, but because she had empowered life to guide itself. Potential had been nurtured, and it was flourishing in ways she could not have predicted. Moving through the quieter streets, she saw evidence of growth, courage, and resilience in even the smallest corners. A woman repaired a broken window of a neighbor's home, a gesture small yet profound. Children worked together to lift a stray boat from the riverbank. Scholars debated with passion but also listened with openness. Each thread of effort, of choice, of understanding, contributed to the living mosaic around her. She understood that happiness and harmony were not simply rewards, they were the natural products of attentiveness, courage, and love woven into the choices of countless individuals. As the sun climbed higher, Omega ascended her usual vantage point atop the tallest tower. From there, the city stretched in every direction, a living constellation of movement, laughter, learning, and care. Threads of possibility shimmered, brighter than she had ever seen, converging and diverging in perfect balance. Some threads shimmered with the promise of adventure, some with acts of quiet kindness, some with moments of courage yet to be realized. Omega could feel them all, her awareness embracing every potential, every choice, without needing to control or dictate. The alpha's pulse echoed through her consciousness, not distant, not commanding, but harmonizing. It resonated like a soft drumbeat in the background of the city's rhythm, a reminder that she was part of a grander design, a co-creator of possibilities both vast and delicate. She felt it not as obligation, but as belonging, a reminder that her purpose was complete not when she directed, but when life itself could flourish with clarity and joy. Evening came, casting long golden shadows across the street. Omega walked through the city one last time, observing every act of generosity, every spark of courage, every smile that brightened a stranger's day. She lingered by the fountain, listening to the music, feeling the laughter and warmth pulse through the threads. In this place, she realized, life did not need constant guidance. It had learned to thrive on its own. Her work had not been to control outcomes, but to nurture the soil in which the seeds of choice could grow. The night deepened, lanterns glimmering in soft, welcoming light. Families strolled through the streets, children played without fear, and people lingered in conversation, sharing thoughts and dreams. Omega stood atop the tower one last time, looking down at the city she had guided, the tapestry she had helped weave. Threads glimmered, strong and radiant, stretching in every direction, each choice acknowledged and valued. She felt an overwhelming peace, a sense of completion that filled her with warmth. The city was alive, vibrant, joyous, and thriving. The alpha's presence pulsed softly through her awareness, steady and eternal, as if affirming that everything was as it should be. Omega smiled, understanding that her journey had not been about knowing or controlling, but about listening, nurturing, and guiding without interference. She had become the quiet heartbeat of possibility, the unseen hand that allowed life to discover its own rhythm. As stars sparkled above, mirrored in the glass streets below, the city glimmered with a soft, steady light, a living testament to resilience, choice, and joy. Omega felt her role as guardian of potential shift from active guidance to serene observation. She could step back now, knowing that the lives she had touched, the threads she had nurtured, would continue to flourish on their own. The city, vibrant and alive, had become a living proof of hope, patience, and the quiet power of possibility. Omega took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of life beneath her, the infinite threads of choice weaving endlessly. She felt calm, radiant, and fulfilled. In that moment, she understood that happiness was not a distant goal but a living, breathing experience, emerging naturally when the freedom of choice met guidance, awareness, and compassion. The city slept, peaceful, harmonious, alive in every sense. Omega stood tall atop her tower, the quiet, eternal guardian of possibility. She gazed at the stars, smiled, and exhaled, letting herself dissolve into the calm of the night. Everything was exactly as it should be. And in that, the Omega finally rested, knowing that the city, its people, and the infinite threads of life she had nurtured would continue to shine, endless, radiant, and free.